They thought he carried dust from the desert, but what he carried was silence and a letter. The first voice Noah heard at Caltech was not a welcome. It was a dismissal. "This class is not for you." The words came from Professor Hart, sharp and final, like a gate slamming shut. The other students turned their heads, some with pity, some with amusement. The boy standing at the door did not look like anyone who belonged here. Noah came from Lancaster, a town pressed into the dry soil of California's Mojave Edge. Wind and sand ruled that land. Dust found its way into beds, into kitchen cupboards, into the cracks of old cars. He grew up next to a failing gas station where the smell of fuel clung to clothes and boots. Those boots, scuffed and cracked, still carried the desert's ash as he crossed the marble gates of the most selective science school in America. His shirt was too wide. His sleeves smelled faintly of oil. While others carried bright laptops and leather satchels, he held only a notebook and a folded letter. The lecture hall gleamed with polished floors and wide windows. Noah walked in slowly, placed his bag on the last bench, and chose a seat near an old vent. The vent rattled every few seconds, a metallic heartbeat. He sat there quietly, as if he had always known this corner was waiting for him. When Professor Hart saw him, he did not ask for his name. He simply leaned close, voice low, but cold. "This class is not for you." Noah did not protest. His face did not harden. Instead, he reached into his notebook and placed a folded letter on the professor's desk. Then he turned, walked back to the final row, and opened his book as though nothing had happened. His pencil moved, recording not only the lecture but also the rhythm of the vent beside him. To Noah, nothing was truly silent. Metal spoke when it bent. Engines spoke when they coughed. Even tired machines had a language, if one stayed long enough to listen. He had learned this not in a laboratory but under trucks, lying on cold concrete while his father repaired engines with hands stained black. His father, a mechanic by trade and a janitor by need, told him again and again, "Do not trust the numbers alone. Trust the sound. Trust the feel." That was the schooling Noah carried into Caltech. Not the polished language of theory, but the steady discipline of listening. In the first lecture, Hart filled the blackboard with equations, the language of power cycles and thermal efficiency. The chalk squeaked, students scribbled furiously. Noah's pencil moved at the same pace, but in his margins were not only numbers. There were little arcs, curves of sound, the mark of vibrations he traced from the vent. He remembered his father's old truck engine, the way its rhythm faltered at dawn when metal was still cold. He remembered how his father would place a hand on the hood and close his eyes, as if listening to a pulse. Now, inside this room of bright minds, Noah was the only one who seemed more absorbed by sound than symbol. Somebody whispered near the window, "How did he get in here?" Another replied, "Maybe he walked into the wrong hall." They did not know that Noah had studied long nights with books discarded from a rural library, that he had built sketches of pistons from memory, that he had kept notebooks filled with both grease stains and calculations. The letter on Hart's desk lay unopened. Inside were only a few lines, written in deliberate, uneven script. "The son of a mechanic asks for no favor. I ask only to sit, to listen, and to learn, if you will allow it." When the lecture ended, students hurried out with the bright chatter of belonging. Noah stayed seated, head bowed, listening still to the vent's hum. For others, it was just old machinery. For him, it was a voice. Every vibration was a reminder that nothing built by human hands is truly mute. That night, in the small rented room several blocks from campus, Noah removed his boots at the door. They were heavy with desert dust, the soles dark with oil. He wiped them carefully, not to make them new, but to honor the miles they had carried him. In the dim light, he unfolded the copy of the letter he had kept for himself. At the bottom, he added one more line, a private promise no one else would see. Listen first, speak if needed, then build. The words rested on the page like a vow. He did not know whether Caltech would let him stay. But Noah believed in silence, in patience, in listening. And he believed that even boots covered in ash could find their place among marble floors. They said equations are mute. He heard them breathing. The lecture hall was warmer than the desert mornings Noah had known. Yet the silence felt just as dry, as if everyone waited for air that never came. On the board, Professor Hart drew a sequence of lines and symbols. The subject was compression, the hidden science of how air and pressure bend to serve engines. Most students bowed their heads, copying in careful strokes. Hart's chalk moved with precision, his voice steady and sharp. When a gas is pressed, when it is kept from leaking, it follows this law. Pressure and volume locked together. This is not poetry. This is mathematics. This is absolute. He turned to the class. Who can tell me what this equation means? Silence answered first. Pens stopped scratching. A few students shifted uneasily. Hart's gaze swept the room, landing, almost unwillingly, on the boy in the last row, the one with the desert on his boots. Noah, Hart said. The name carried a weight, as though the professor had spoken it against his own judgment. Do you know? Noah lifted his head. He did not glance at the board. Instead, he folded his hands for a moment as if listening. Then he spoke slowly. When gas is pressed into silence, he said, it sings a song without leaks, a song only the piston can hear. The room stirred. Some students frowned, confused. Others chuckled softly. But one boy, seated near the middle rows, leaned forward. Hart narrowed his eyes. This is not song, Mr. Lancaster. It is law. Precise. Cold. Noah nodded, unoffended. Yes, sir. But every law has an echo. My father once told me that when you trap air inside a cylinder, if it holds steady, you can hear it. Not with ears, perhaps, but with your hands on the steel. It has a rhythm. If that rhythm breaks, the law has been betrayed. A ripple moved through the students. It was not quite laughter now, not quite disbelief. It was something quieter. Curiosity. The boy in the middle row raised his hand. Professor, I think what he means is that the numbers are one way of listening. He just listens another way. Hart ignored him. He turned back to the board, chalk striking harder than before. Yet Noah's words lingered, as if the room itself held them. After class, while most hurried out, the boy who had spoken stayed behind. He walked to the last row where Noah was already closing his notebook. I'm Toby Ramos, he said, voice casual but eyes sharp. You don't sound like someone lost. You sound like someone who has been here all along. Noah smiled faintly, unsure how to answer. He gathered his things. Toby did not move. You said gas sings. My uncle fixes farm engines in Bakersfield. He always said you can feel when the machine is holding its breath. I think I know what you meant. Noah looked at him properly then. In Toby's eyes there was no mockery, only recognition. They walked together toward the library, a building whose stone steps had been worn by decades of heavy mines. Inside, the air smelled of old paper and polish. Students sat bent over thick books, but Noah went straight to an empty table in the corner. From his bag, he pulled not textbooks, but sheets of paper covered in sketches. Toby watched as Noah drew, line after line. Cylinders, pistons, the delicate balance of moving parts. He shaded them with strokes so sure they looked alive. You drew that from memory, Toby asked. Yes, Noah replied. My father rebuilt an old assembly when I was small. I remember the smell of oil. I remember how his hands pressed each piece in silence, as though he was listening to its story. I think I have never forgotten that smell. The library around them was hushed, but Noah's words carried their own resonance. It was as though the mechanical shapes on the page had voices, too. For hours, Noah worked quietly. He traced the path of pistons. He marked the spots where oil must flow. He circled joints that would one day wear thin. Toby sat beside him, sometimes asking, sometimes simply watching. Once, Toby leaned close and whispered, "When you say machines sing, what do they sing about?" Noah's pencil did not stop. About patience. About pressure that holds steady. About not breaking faith with what they were made for. The words landed gently, as if meant not only for machines. Toby thought of his uncle's tired farm equipment, the way it rattled through dry seasons. He thought of his own unease in classes filled with brilliance. For the first time, he felt that someone else understood the language of endurance. As the library lights dimmed, Noah gathered his sketches carefully. The last page still smelled faintly of oil from his hands. He held it as though it were not paper at all, but memory itself. Walking back into the night, the two boys stepped onto stone paths lit by weak lamps. Students hurried past with plans and futures bright in their eyes. Noah's steps were slower, his silence deeper. But beside him, Toby matched his pace. Equations might have looked cold on the board, but tonight, Noah had made them breathe. And in that breath, he was no longer alone. 10 minutes, one boy, one broken engine, and a silence that rewrote a room. The challenge came without warning. It was Professor Richardson this time, not Hart. Richardson was known for his sharp eyes and sharper tests. He believed that true knowledge revealed itself not in exams, but in the pressure of impossible moments. On that day, he wheeled into the lecture hall a small engine, dented and reluctant. The class gathered in a half-circle, curious and wary. Richardson tapped the metal with a wrench, the sound echoing like a gavel. "This machine refuses to run," he announced. 10 minutes. Anyone who can bring it to life will have my respect. Anyone who cannot should remember that knowledge without touch is only half of learning. No one moved. Some students whispered excuses. Others stared at the floor. Richardson's gaze swept the room until it found the boy at the back. "Noah, come forward." There was a murmur. Some expected him to falter. Others waited for amusement. Noah rose quietly, walked to the engine, and placed his hand on its frame. The metal was still warm from failed attempts earlier in the day. He closed his eyes for a breath. He pulled the starter. The engine coughed, sputtered, then fell silent with a hollow sound. Noah tilted his head, as though listening to a wounded animal. "That is not a misfire," he said softly. "That is cavitation. It is trying to breathe, but it collapses on itself." Richardson crossed his arms. "Explain." Noah knelt closer. His fingers brushed the bolts, the casing, the joints where different metals met. He tapped the cylinder gently with his knuckles, listening to the echo. "Aluminum expands quickly," he murmured. "Steel does not. When the heat rises, aluminum pushes too fast, while steel lags behind. The two metals bite against each other. The engine is eating itself." Students leaned in. The explanation was simple yet vivid. For the first time, some could see the law of thermal expansion not as an abstract figure, but as a quarrel between metals. Richardson narrowed his eyes. "So what would you do?" Noah lifted the wrench, not to strike, but to point. "This machine needs kindness in its joints, a layer that allows the impatient metal and the patient metal to move without tearing each other apart. Molybdenum disulfide, a dry lubricant. It will let them breathe together." A ripple of surprise passed through the class. Few had thought of it. Fewer still had spoken with such quiet certainty. Richardson signaled for the supplies. A small tube of the dark compound was handed to Noah. He worked quickly, not with the rush of desperation, but with the calm rhythm of someone who had done this in dim garages under harsher eyes. His hands were steady, his motions practiced. Minutes slipped away. The room was utterly silent except for the soft scrape of his work. At last he wiped his hands, replaced the cover, and pulled the starter once more. This time the engine turned. Not violently, not hesitantly. It began with a low hum, then steadied into a rhythm as smooth as a heartbeat. The sound filled the hall like music. For a long moment, no one moved. Then, as if released from a spell, the class broke into applause. Some students stood, others laughed in relief. Richardson did not clap, but the corner of his mouth shifted, almost a smile. Noah did not raise his head to claim triumph. He kept his hand on the engine, feeling its vibration. His lips moved in a whisper, words no one else could hear. "Thank you for speaking." Richardson stepped forward. "Class, remember this. He did not guess. He did not rush. He listened. And the steel replied." The applause faded into a thoughtful hush. For the first time, Noah was not the boy with dust on his boots. He was the boy who had brought silence into a room and turned it into rhythm. That night, alone in his small rented room, Noah laid his notes beside the boots at the door. He wrote in his notebook, "In 10 minutes, silence can teach more than 10 years of noise. Machines are patient. We must be as well." He closed the book, the hum of the day still alive in his memory. Outside, the city whispered with traffic, but inside, Noah carried only the sound of a heart-like engine and the echo of a room learning to listen. He didn't fix it. He listened, and the steel replied. The workshop smelled of oil and dusted steel, a scent Noah knew better than the smell of bread. The day's light fell through high windows, striking the rows of machines that stood like stubborn beasts. Professor Richardson had invited a handful of students into the research bay, a privilege reserved only for those he believed had something more than clever minds. Noah did not expect to be included, yet there he was, sitting quietly at the far bench, his notebook open, pencil poised. On the table stood an engine, larger than the small model he had coaxed to life days before. Its frame carried the scars of testing, scratches, burn marks, bolts replaced more than once. The team had been fighting a single problem. Cylinder 2 lost pressure without warning. Richardson cleared his throat. "We will run the cycle again. Watch closely. Note every change. Then we will discuss." The engine roared to life, shaking the room. Students bent over gauges and screens. Numbers flickered. Pressure lines danced. Then, as before, Cylinder 2 fell behind. Its line dipped, steady at first, then faltering. A groan of frustration rose from the group. Some scribbled equations. Others muttered theories. But Noah remained still, eyes closed, fingers resting lightly on the bench as though waiting for something deeper. The machine shut down. Silence swelled. Richardson turned to his students. "Well?" One proposed a faulty piston. Another suggested fuel mix. A third blamed worn spark. Noah opened his eyes. He spoke softly, almost to himself. "Cylinder 2 remembers more than we think." The words hung strange in the air. Some students glanced at him with confusion. One laughed quietly. Richardson's gaze sharpened. "Explain." Noah rose, walked closer. His pencil traced an invisible path in the air. Oil lines, bypass channels, the quiet arteries that fed the cylinder. "It is not the piston, not the spark. The oil travels this way. Yes. He paused, moving his hand along the imagined map. Here, where the valve bends, it should close smooth. But the sound tells me it does not. The valve is worn thin. Oil escapes. Cylinder 2 is tired. Richardson leaned forward. You are saying the bypass valve is failing. Noah nodded, eyes lowered. It has been carrying more than its share. Machines do not complain loudly. They simply falter. Silence followed. Then, for the first time, Richardson spoke his name without command, without test. Noah. The single word was heavy, not harsh. It was recognition. Noah did not look up. He wrote instead on the corner of his page, Cylinder 2 remembers. Then he closed the notebook, as if that was all that needed to be said. The other students murmured among themselves. Some doubted, some wondered. But Richardson did not dismiss it. He reached for the maintenance logs stacked in the corner, his brows tightening as he searched through pages. The logs spoke of repeated failures, quick fixes, parts replaced in haste, a bypass valve noted but never changed. Richardson's finger paused on a line from the previous year, initials scribbled beside the report. He frowned, remembering the student who had left abruptly, whose work had never been checked again. He looked back at Noah. You may be right. Noah stood quietly by the machine, one hand resting on the frame. He was not triumphant. He was simply listening, as though waiting for the steel to breathe again. That evening, when the bay emptied, Richardson lingered. He watched Noah sketch alone at the far table. The boy drew not engines but echoes, arcs of sound, curves of vibration, rhythms that no textbook had taught. For years, Richardson had believed that science was a fortress of certainty, guarded by the sharp edges of logic. But as he watched Noah, he felt for the first time that machines were not mute at all. They answered, if one had the patience to listen. Outside, the night deepened. Inside, the hum of silence became a language between teacher, student, and steel. Noah wrote a final line before closing his notebook. A machine does not break. It waits for us to hear what it has been saying all along. And with that, Cylinder 2, tired but not forgotten, became the first voice that turned a workshop into a place of listening. Numbers can be cold, unless spoken by someone who remembers the heat of a farm engine. The classroom was quiet when Richardson entered. He carried no engine this time. No tool, only a single piece of chalk. He turned to the board and began to write. Symbols, ratios, letters that lived best in silence. Today, he said, we speak of expansion. Metals do not stay as they are. They grow restless when heated. They stretch against their own shape. The measure of that restlessness is this coefficient. Who here can tell me its value for aluminum for steel? A hand rose in the front. A student answered with precision. Aluminum, 22 times 10 to the minus 6 per degree Celsius. Steel, 12 times 10 to the minus 6. Correct, Richardson said. He looked across the room. Now tell me what that means. The student hesitated, then repeated the definition. It means aluminum expands faster than steel. Richardson nodded, but his eyes shifted to the back row, where Noah sat quietly as always. Noah, he said, what does it mean to you? Noah lifted his head. His voice was calm, slow, each word carrying weight. Aluminum is impatient, he said. It rushes forward at the first touch of heat. Steel is patient. It waits, it holds its ground, it moves more slowly. Put them together without care, and they quarrel. The young and the old cannot share a room unless someone listens to both. The room stilled. Students stared, some smiling, some puzzled. Richardson's chalk froze in midair. Noah continued. My father used to fix old tractors on the farm. He said numbers are not enough. You must know their tempers. Aluminum is quick-tempered, easy to scar but quick to heal. Steel is stubborn. It takes longer to bend, but once bent, it remembers. He said to treat them as you would treat people, with patience, with kindness, and with respect for their differences. A quiet murmur swept the class. For the first time, the law of thermal expansion had stepped down from the board and into their lives. Richardson set the chalk aside. His voice, usually clipped, carried something softer. Class, remember this. Precision without understanding is brittle. Understanding without precision is blind. But when the two meet, numbers grow warm. That evening, long after students had left, Richardson sat alone in his office. On his desk lay reports, recommendations, and the endless papers of academic duty. He picked up a blank sheet and began to write, not equations, but a letter. To the council, it began. There is a student among us who does not guess. He listens. He hears the laws of physics not as symbols alone, but as voices. I have never seen such a gift. He paused, staring at the words. For years, he had prided himself on demanding proof, on doubting every claim until iron itself bent before evidence. But here was a boy who bent nothing, who only placed his ear to the heart of a machine and heard its story. He signed the letter with care, folded it, and set it aside for morning. Meanwhile, in his small room beyond the gates, Noah sat with his boots by the door. His notebook lay open on his lap. He drew once more the simple lines of aluminum and steel, side by side. Beneath them he wrote, "The young leap, the old endure, but only together can they build." He closed the book gently, as though sealing not just notes, but memories of his father's hand guiding his own over an engine block in the desert heat. Outside, night spread across Pasadena. But inside 2 rooms, the office of a professor and the corner of a boy, numbers had grown warm, carrying not only law, but life. Machines don't keep grudges, but they don't forget either. The workshop echoed with the metallic cough of another failed run. Cylinder 2 again dropped its pressure, this time even sooner. The graphs on the screen dipped sharply, mocking every fix attempted. Students groaned, tools clattered. Richardson rubbed his temple with weary hands. Again, he muttered. Every test, the same failure. I want answers. He turned to the group, but no one spoke. Finally, his eyes rested, as always now, on the boy at the back. Noah rose quietly. He walked to the engine, placed his palm against the side of cylinder 2, and closed his eyes. The machine was still warm, its breath uneven, like a tired horse after too many miles. It is not the piston, Noah whispered. Not the spark, not the valve. It is deeper. He tapped gently along the cylinder wall. The sound changed, faintly hollow in one place. He listened again, then nodded. This sleeve, he said. It does not belong. Richardson frowned. Explain. Noah stepped back. Someone replaced the cylinder sleeve with a cheaper one. It was not forged for this engine. It is thinner, softer. It bends under heat, and the engine remembers. The room fell silent. Richardson motioned for the records. A thick binder was placed before him. He flipped pages quickly, searching the maintenance notes from the year before. There, buried in lines of ink, was the truth. Cylinder 2 had been repaired, sleeve replaced. Not by factory order, but by the hand of a student now gone from the program. Richardson stared at the page, remembering the boy. Brilliant but careless, eager to cut corners. The ghost of his work had haunted this machine ever since. Noah stood still, hands folded. Machines do not forgive mistakes, but they do not hate us either. They only wait, carrying the memory, until we are willing to put it right. The words hung heavy. Students exchanged glances. For them, engines had always been problems to solve, equations to master. But to Noah, the machine was almost human, scarred but patient. Richardson closed the binder slowly. His voice was low, almost respectful. You see ghosts where the rest of us see steel. Noah shook his head. Not ghosts, just memory. Metal remembers its wounds, the way people do. Until we heal them, they will always return. That evening, the faulty sleeve was removed. In Noah's hands, it looked fragile, ashamed of its role. He placed it gently on the bench, as though laying a tired bone to rest. The team fitted a proper sleeve, forged strong, true to the engine's design. When the machine was run again, its rhythm steadied. Cylinder 2 no longer faltered. The ghost had been answered. After the others left, Richardson remained. He watched Noah clean his tools in silence, methodical, reverent. The professor's chest ached with something he had not felt in years, humility. For the first time, he realized there was more to engineering than calculation. There was listening. There was memory. There was even forgiveness. Later that night, Noah wrote in his notebook, "A ghost in the cylinder is only a mistake unhealed. Machines wait for our hands to make them whole." He closed the book, placed it beside his boots, and lay down to rest. The hum of the repaired engine still filled his mind, not as noise, but as the voice of something finally at peace. A wrench isn't for hitting, it's for listening with your hands. The workshop was restless that morning. Students argued over torque values, argued over tolerances, argued over everything that could be written in numbers. The air was full of voices but empty of stillness. Richardson let them quarrel a while before raising a hand. Enough! There is another way to learn. He looked toward the corner where Noah sat, silent as always, his notebook closed on the bench. Noah, tell us, how would you approach this engine if it were yours alone? The room quieted, though some faces still carried impatience. Noah did not rush. He stood, walked to the workbench, and picked up a wrench lying among the scattered tools. Its steel was bright, edges sharp from factory polish. Noah held it a moment, then shook his head gently. My father gave me one, he said. Not new like this, old, scarred, the handle worn smooth by his hands. He told me once, do not twist too fast, do not strike. Hold the wrench as if it were alive. Feel the strain before the bolt moves. Listen with your hand. He gripped the tool lightly, turning it as if remembering a weight from the past. I was small then. I thought he was only speaking of bolts and nuts. But I know now he was speaking of patience, of respect. A wrench is not for forcing. It is for hearing what the metal is ready to give. The workshop fell silent. Even the hum of the overhead lights seemed to hush. Students leaned forward, not because they understood yet, but because something in his voice compelled them. Richardson asked quietly, and if the metal refuses? Noah lowered the wrench to the bench. Then you wait. Forcing only breaks. Waiting teaches. No one laughed this time. No one scoffed. The weight of his words filled the space, heavier than any machine. Richardson, for the first time in many years, allowed the silence to linger. He looked around the room. You hear him. The law is not only in numbers, it is also in waiting hands. The students shifted uneasily. Some scribbled notes. Others stared at Noah, as though seeing him for the first time not as an intruder, but as a keeper of something they had forgotten. After class, a few lingered. One brave voice asked him, "Do you really believe a tool can speak?" Noah smiled faintly. "It does not speak in words, but it tells you when to stop. It tells you when the bolt has had enough. If you listen, you will hear it." That night, Noah pulled from his bag a cloth-wrapped bundle. Inside lay the old wrench his father had given him, pitted with rust but still strong. He placed it on the table in his small room, running his fingers over the worn grip. The marks of his father's hand were carved into it, as if the man himself still guided him. He wrote in his notebook, "The tool remembers the hand remembers the father, and the father teaches still." When he closed the book, the wrench remained before him, not as a piece of steel, but as a voice carried through years, as a promise that even in silence, the past could teach the present. And in the workshop of Caltech, for the first time, a class had learned to be still. He asked for nothing but a corner, and silence to build. The corridors of Caltech were bright, full of light and voices, polished with ambition. But down a narrow staircase, beneath the noise of classrooms and lecture halls, there was a basement where silence lived. Richardson led Noah there one evening. The professor walked with his usual brisk steps. But when they reached the heavy door, his hand paused on the handle. "You wanted no scholarship," he said. "No title. You asked only to stay. Here is a place no one else wanted. Take it. Build what you must." He opened the door. The room was bare, only a single bench, a broken lamp, and walls scarred by time. The air smelled of rust and dust. Noah stepped inside and breathed slowly. To others, it might have looked forgotten. To him, it was sanctuary. That night he returned with scraps collected from the edges of the workshop, discarded steel, broken bolts, empty cans. He arranged them carefully on the bench as if each piece carried dignity. Slowly, with patient hands, he began to build. Not a polished machine, not a project worthy of papers or awards, but something small, born from memory. He cut open an old tin, shaped its curve into a chamber. He filed pieces of scrap steel into pistons. He fit them together with care, whispering to each part as though greeting an old friend. The lamp flickered. Shadows stretched long on the walls. Noah worked without hurry, listening more than moving. Every strike of the file, every turn of the wrench was a conversation. The metal answered with rhythm, guiding his hand. Days passed. Students above debated theories and pursued competitions. Noah returned always to the basement. Piece by piece, his engine took form. It was no larger than a loaf of bread, its body patched with scars, but it stood proudly on the bench. One evening, Toby followed him down. He watched from the doorway, not wishing to intrude. When Noah finally looked up, Toby stepped forward. "What will you call it?" he asked. Noah shook his head. "It has no name. It is still learning." Toby touched the edge of the bench. "Most of us build to be seen, but you build as if the machine itself is your only audience." Noah smiled faintly. "Machines do not clap, but they remember if we rushed them. This one is not ready. It still needs silence." Word of the basement reached a few others. One by one, curious students came to peer at the small engine. Some scoffed at its patchwork frame, but one girl, after watching it shudder to life for a brief second, whispered, "That's not just mechanics. That's kindness." Richardson himself descended one night, standing in the shadows while Noah adjusted a bolt with careful hands. The professor said nothing, only watched the boy who treated scrap metal as though it were sacred. For the first time, he wondered if teaching was not only about giving knowledge, but about protecting silence for those who listened differently. Noah, unaware of his audience, whispered to the engine, Not yet, but soon. In his notebook later, he wrote, "Even without a name, it grows. Not every creation needs a title. Sometimes silence is enough." The basement held no banners, no applause, no accolades. But in that room with no name, a boy with dust on his boots was building more than a machine. He was building a way of seeing the world, through patience, through kindness, through silence that spoke louder than noise. And the engine, though small, seemed to hum with gratitude. Some need a scholarship. He needed only a place to sit and be told to stay. The basement had become Noah's refuge. The nameless engine sat quietly on the bench, never demanding, always waiting. Yet above, in the workshop where the real research was done, Noah remained an outsider. He was allowed to observe, sometimes to touch, but never to belong. That changed on a morning filled with the scent of oil and tension. The team had been struggling with a new prototype, an advanced piston design meant to push efficiency beyond what textbooks promised. Equations covered the whiteboard. Voices rose, sharp and impatient. But the engine on the table refused to care. It knocked, sputtered, and silenced every theory. Richardson at last set down his chalk. His voice carried fatigue. "We are missing something. We are hearing numbers, not the machine itself." He turned. His gaze rested on Noah. "You. Come here." Noah stepped forward, quiet as always. He laid a hand on the frame, listening to the faint tremor that lingered even after the machine stopped. He traced a finger in the air, sketching the unseen space above the piston. "It is knocking," he said softly. "The chamber does not let the flame rest. The explosion strikes too hard, too early. It needs a cushion." The students frowned. "A cushion," one repeated. Noah nodded. "Yes. A squish zone. Shape the piston so the fuel-air mix is pushed into a tight pocket, smooth and controlled. It will calm the knocking, like guiding a rushing river into a still pond." Silence followed. Then Richardson leaned over the sketches. He drew quickly, adjusting the curves, his eyes lit with recognition. "Yes," he murmured. "Yes, that could work." The team rebuilt, following Noah's quiet guidance. When the engine ran again, the knocking eased, the rhythm steadied. The numbers on the screen climbed, not with drama, but with quiet certainty. Richardson straightened, dusted chalk from his hands, and looked at Noah. "From this day, you are not an observer. You are a research assistant. This is your bench as much as mine." The words struck Noah deeper than applause. For the first time, he was not merely allowed to stay. He was asked to belong. He bowed his head. "Thank you, sir." Richardson began the next class differently. He stood before the students, chalk ready, but instead of writing, he asked a single question. "What is this machine not telling us?" Confusion rippled. They were used to solving for what was known, not for what was hidden. But slowly, one by one, they began to listen. Not only to numbers, but to pauses, to rhythms, to silences. Noah sat among them now, no longer at the very edge. His presence was not loud, not commanding. It was simply steady, like the heartbeat of the machines he cared for. That evening, in his small room, he set his boots by the door and opened his notebook. He wrote only one line. "A place is not given by walls or titles. It is given when someone says, 'Stay.'" He closed the book gently. The nameless engine in the basement waited for him, humming its unfinished song. But Noah's heart was lighter. He had been given not recognition, but something rarer. A bench, a belonging. And for a boy who had walked through gates with only dust on his boots, that was enough. It wasn't broken. It was waiting to be heard. The basement was no longer empty. Where once there had been only scraps and silence, now stood an engine unlike any other at Caltech. It was small, its body patched with steel rescued from forgotten corners, its pistons shaped by hands that valued patience more than speed. Noah called it nothing. To him, it was not an invention to claim, but a conversation continued. On the night of its first true run, Richardson descended the narrow stairs. A handful of students followed, curiosity mixed with reverence. They had learned, slowly, that Noah's silence was not absence, but depth. Tonight they came not to test him, but to witness. Noah stood by the bench, his boots planted firm, his hands resting on the frame of the engine. He looked at no one, only at the machine that had grown from weeks of listening. He turned the crank. For a moment, there was only stillness. Then a soft hum began, low and steady. The engine caught, not with violence, but with calm. Its rhythm was smooth, almost tender, like the pulse of something alive. Synthetic oil flowed through its veins, chosen carefully to soothe rather than strain. There was no rattle, no complaint, only a steady voice, as though the engine itself had been waiting to breathe without pain. The students leaned in. One whispered, "It sounds at peace." Richardson nodded slowly. His voice was quiet, but it carried across the room. "You are not only a mechanic of machines, Noah. You are a mechanic of empathy." Noah's lips moved, almost inaudible. He whispered to the engine, "Thank you for waiting." For a long time, no one spoke. The hum filled the room, steady, healing, a reminder that not all progress comes from force. Some comes from patience, from kindness, from listening first. When at last Noah shut the engine down, the silence that followed was not empty. It was full, of respect, of memory, of something the walls themselves seemed to hold. On the bench beside the machine lay a small wooden plaque Noah had carved in the evenings. The words were simple. Listen first, speak if needed, build. Richardson touched the plaque with his fingertips, then looked at Noah. His sternness had softened, replaced by something like gratitude. "You have taught us more than any equation this year." Noah bowed his head. He did not claim triumph. He did not speak of brilliance. He simply placed his hand once more on the steel, as though sealing a promise. Later, when the others had gone, Noah remained in the basement alone. He sat beside the quiet engine, notebook open on his knee. He wrote slowly, deliberately. Engines remember too. Not just failures, not just pain. They remember when we have listened, when we have been gentle, and so do people. He closed the book, placed it on the bench, and for the first time allowed himself to rest with a smile. Up above, the lights of Caltech burned bright into the night. But down in the room with no name, a boy with dust still clinging to his boots had built something greater than a machine. He had built a way of being, one that could outlast engines, outlast equations, perhaps even outlast himself. And in the quiet hum of memory, the desert boy finally belonged. Thank you, my friend, for staying with Noah's journey until the very end. If these hours have warmed you, if the dust on his boots and the hum of his engines spoke to something deep inside, then I am grateful. Stories like this are not about noise. They are about patience, memory, and kindness, the things we carry long after the machines grow quiet. If you wish to walk with me again, through other lives and other fires, I invite you. Subscribe to this channel. Stay close. There are more voices to be heard, more engines of the heart to be built. Until then, keep listening. For sometimes, the quietest things speak the loudest.